I must say right away that I do not consider myself a criminal, although formally what I do for the soul and for earnings is illegal. People like me are called black diggers. Armed with old maps and a metal detector, I periodically go on expeditions in search of treasures and other valuables. Unfortunately, it is far from always possible to find something of any value, but one finds more than pays for all unsuccessful sorties. Usually I have to travel far outside the city, but recently I heard rumors. They decided to demolish the old hospital for the mentally ill in my city in order to build a large housing estate in its place. Luck seemed to go into my hands, because earlier in its buildings there was a military town, in which white guard troops were stationed during the Civil War. Who knows, maybe with my search experience I will be able to discover the legendary Kolchak's gold, mysteriously missing somewhere in our area, or at least a couple of ingots from that treasury. Soon the rumors were confirmed. Patients were hastily transported to other clinics, and I was looking forward to my time. One of the orderlies of the closing medical facility agreed to become my secret informant, of course, for a modest fee. A week later, he called me and said that they were about to bring out the last psycho and take away. None of the staff was left on the territory of the hospital either. However, tomorrow the equipment will come here and begin to demolish the dilapidated buildings. I only had the next night. But the orderly also pleased with the good news, since the ownerless territory will be less than a day, and all the property of the hospital has already been taken out. It was decided not to leave guards at the facility. The path was completely free. It didn't take me much time to get ready. All the ammunition was ready a long time ago. After waiting for darkness, I jumped into my jeep and in 15 minutes I was there. The expedition promised to be the easiest and fastest of all in my life, so it seemed to me at that time. The hospital was on the outskirts. There were no residential buildings or administrative buildings nearby, so I had no one to hide from. Whistling, I calmly walked towards the death-knife fence, surrounded by barbed wire on top. Such an obstacle did not frighten me for a long time. Having climbed the folding ladder, I bit the wire with tongs and instantly jumped over the fence. It was difficult to scare me, but once here, even I felt at least uncomfortable. 12 lifeless buildings of the now former psychiatric hospital looked at me with their windows. They were low brick buildings with narrow windows, many of which showed bars. But most of all, the absolute silence was frightening. No conversations of people, no noise of cars, no chirping of birds, as if everything around had died out. Without thinking twice, I got down to business. The front of work was considerable, and only 6 hours remained before dawn. Moving from building to building, I became more and more disappointed. Neither in the houses themselves nor near them I could find anything worthwhile, except perhaps a couple of copper coins from Tsarist times. However, I saved the sweetest part for last. I'm talking about a small, squat house on the edge of the hospital grounds. According to the archival plan, this house, like the entire military camp, was built more than 100 years ago and was intended for the residence of the highest-ranking officers. Perhaps even Admiral Kolchak himself visited it, which means that the chances of profiting from something increased many times over. The only thing that alerted me a little was that on none of the modern plans of the mental hospital of this building was it noted that it did not exist at all. At first I was even frightened that it had been demolished for a long time, but now I saw it in front of me in all its glory. However, it was difficult to call it beauty. The small brick 2-story building turned black from time to time, and its first floor sank so deeply that it looked more like a semi-basement. But most of the questions were caused by the fact that all the windows of this building were walled up. However, he himself did not look abandoned. The road to it was cleared of leaves, and the front door looked the most expensive and strong of all that were here. Entering the house turned out to be how difficult. The lock turned out to be no less reliable than the door itself. What the hell? This hut will be demolished one of these days anyway. They might not have been locked up. I grumbled under my breath. But I'm not used to giving up. Although I had to puff, after 20 minutes I finally stepped inside this mysterious structure. A sharp chemical supply hit my nose. Of course, I understood that just yesterday various medical procedures were being carried out in the hospital, but such a dense smell of medicines was felt only in this building. Inside, due to the lack of windows, there was absolute darkness. I immediately turned on my headlamp and looked around. The first floor was nothing special: deserted offices, old furniture, which they decided to give under the bucket along with the building, and the usual garbage left in a hurry by doctors. But what really caught my attention was the luxurious staircase in the center, which gave the shabby, in general, house the appearance of a small palace. She was clearly the same age as the entire building. Its steps led both up to the second floor and down into a deep basement. Realizing that it was underground, in the walls and floor of the basement, that it was most likely to discover the treasures I had come for, I decided to delay this intriguing moment and went upstairs. It seems that the staircase has never been repaired over the past century, and therefore it creaked throughout the entire district. Every step I took cut the oppressive silence that still reigned around me. Suddenly, at the same time as the creak, I heard some other sound. The creak almost drowned it out, and yet I definitely heard something and was sure that the sound came from inside the building. I stopped and listened, but again everything was quiet. As I expected, the second floor was also nothing spectacular. But as soon as I took a closer look at one of the offices, I changed my mind. There was a rather large safe in the corner. Obsessed with looking for antiquities, I somehow forgot that something very expensive could be stored in the hospital itself. For example, rare medicines that I could profitably drive on the black market. My joy was only spoiled by the thought that this heavy colossus would have to be dragged to the car, because it would definitely not work to open it with improvised means. But the safe was not locked. To my great disappointment, there was no money in the safe, no medicines, or anything else that could replenish my capital. All that was in it was a thick old folder, tied for some reason with a few turns of thick fishing line. I decided to amuse my curiosity, since I could not amuse my pocket, and cut the fishing line. The folder had faded handwriting, "Signa patient." Well, let's see how this poor fellow managed to get here and what kind of Napoleon he imagined himself to be. I grinned, opening the folder. But there was nothing funny inside. I began to read diagonally the pages nested in the folder, and this is what I found out. 10 years ago, an unusual patient was admitted to this hospital. It was a boy of about 12 years old. His exact age could not be found out, since he did not have any documents with him. He grew up in a family of alcoholics and hid in a doghouse from his parents' beatings from an early age. As a result, he completely settled there with the shepherd dog, who shared food with him, and, in fact, raised him like a second mother. The child adopted all the habits of the animal, ran on all fours, barked, growled, and when the guy got a little stronger, he bit his own parents with his teeth. Then he ended up in this psychiatric clinic. From the ornate formulations, I realized that officially the young patient, who had no relatives or relatives left, was not included in any databases. This was done so that any doctors and scientists could test a variety of treatment methods on it. Of course, all this was done unofficially and secretly. Most of the pages described what experimental drugs were administered to this poor fellow and what effect they had on him. Having carried away this reading matter, I completely forgot about time. Having read the folder about halfway through, I looked at my watch and gasped. It would start to get light in 40 minutes, and I hadn't even gone down to the basement yet. I dropped the folder and wanted to run downstairs, but decided to take a last look at the most recent entry. It read, "The patient has completely lost his human appearance, both externally and internally. Verdict: leave in a special ward, stop giving food and water." I felt uneasy from what I read, but things were not waiting. It was necessary to urgently bring what had been started to the end. As I descended, I heard something again. but now much more distinctly. It was somewhere between a scream and a howl, and this time the sound came from outside, not far from the front door, which I had left open. Probably a homeless dog has wandered, I decided as I walked, knowing deep down in my soul that dogs don't make such sounds. I ran into the basement and immediately began to search. There was no time for a preliminary inspection, although here the darkness was even thicker. Moving the metal detector along the walls, floor, and ceiling, behind its measured beeping in the headphones, I seemed to hear something else. These sounds resembled the steps of bare human feet, although too frequent. It seemed to me that they were running somewhere far away on the street, then, on the second floor, then right above me. But the excitement of the search obscured any of my fears and suspicions, and where could a person come from, and even barefoot? All the patients were taken away, and no one but me would have dared to meddle here at night. And finally, I stumbled upon something. Looking closer, I saw that it was an old chain. Not the most valuable find, but, as they say, without fish. One end of the chain led to the basement wall and was nailed to an equally old nail, the other to a shackle bracelet. I reasoned that in ancient times prisoners of war or guilty soldiers were kept on this chain. I bent down to get a better look at the chain, and then the light of the flashlight fell on something terrible and disgusting. Next to the chain, in a puddle of gore, lay a severed finger. It was oddly elongated, yet definitely a human. I didn't like this at all. After all, this is not a morgue or a surgical department, where such pictures are probably in the order of things. Thinking that none of Kolchak's gold was worth such an adventure, I decided to return to the car. I was already climbing the stairs, but curiosity and greed took their toll. I decided to devote just a few minutes to the second part of the basement, which I had not yet had time to visit. How I later regretted this decision of mine. Scanning the walls of the basement with my eyes, so as not to miss something valuable, I did not look at my feet at all. Suddenly my foot fell into something unpleasantly soft. I slowly lowered my head with a flashlight down, and barely restrained the urge to vomit. My foot got stuck in the entrails of a fresh corpse. His throat was torn, his intestines were released, as if some predator had mocked the unfortunate man for more than 1 hour. Despite the disfigurement of the body, I recognized in it the same orderly whom I had recruited for several days as my informant. Forgetting everything, I rushed to run, but turning around, I saw this in front of me. I was blocked by a being that I will never forget. His arms were the same extraordinary length as his legs, and rested on the floor with his palms. The skin was completely pale, the ears stretched out to the sides, bright purple bruises gaped under the eyes. In the eyes of this monster, instead of pupils and whites, there was some kind of bloody mess. And yet it saw me, well, or at least felt it. I understood this by how aggressively it bared its rotten teeth. Despite all these terrifying features, I understood that a man was standing in front of me, or at least what they once were. I tried to run to the side of this creature, but it immediately rushed in my direction. Protecting my face, I put my hand forward, and the creature bit into it with incredible force. In an instant, his jaws shattered the bones in my forearm and tore a large piece of meat out of it. I screamed in excruciating pain, but my survival instinct gave me strength. I grabbed a metal detector that was lying nearby and hit the monster several times with all my strength. He immediately jumped to the side, put his arms around his knees and huddled in the corner, as if the pain was some kind of command for him. The way to salvation opened up. I ran with all my might to the street, and then to that part of the fence where the barbed wire was cut. Running out of the ill-fated building, I heard that the creature on its four limbs rushed after me and quickly caught up. And now, already climbing the edge of the fence, I felt how the freak bit me on the shin just as hard and pulled me down. I was able to escape only by leaving another piece of my body in the mouth of my pursuer. I could no longer run and crawled on all fours to the jeep. I realized with horror that if the creature climbed over the fence, and it could easily do this, I would face the same fate as the orderly in the basement. But when I turned around, I saw no one. Apparently, it itself considered the territory outside the hospital forbidden for itself. I could not tell the doctors what really happened to me. I was afraid that in this case my black deeds would be revealed, for which I was threatened with a real prison term. Therefore, I came up with a story with a pack of stray dogs, which I fought off with difficulty. I managed to restore my leg, but I had to say goodbye to my arm. The wound was too deep. A few days later, moving away from the shock, I tried to recreate in my head all the circumstances of what had happened. Of course, I immediately realized that this unknown individual was the Cigna patient. A difficult childhood, bullying in a psychiatric hospital and numerous medical experiments finally killed everything human in that guy, leaving only the simplest instincts. It was decided to transport the Cigna patient last, and getting the creature out of the basement was the last task for my friend the orderly. But he did not know that. Striving for freedom, the individual bit off his thumb and removed the chain to which he was chained. As soon as the door of the ward opened, the creature attacked the orderly, bit it and disemboweled him. And the rest of the employees, seeing this, simply locked the door to the building and hurriedly retreated, hoping that the building during the demolition would bury under itself what they had created with their inhuman experiments.